I remember the exact moment when I learnt the lesson of taking responsibility. And it was a painful one. I was 17 years old and I was living in a psychiatric hospital. I'd been there since I was 15 years old, so I'd already been there for 2 years, and I was about to turn 18. And what that meant was the possibility that I might get sent to an adult psychiatric hospital, because I was currently in a teenager ward. And honestly, everyone knew that if you got sent to an adult psychiatric hospital, you were fucked. Like, probably fucked. It was not a place you wanted to go because the system was so broken. And at least with teenagers, I have to admit, teenagers' care was awful as well. But at least with teenagers and children, there's more people involved. They have to protect you. The government has to be more involved because you're young. But when you're an adult, you're just left to your own devices. You're now responsible for your life, and so they just leave you to it. And trust me, the adult psychiatric hospitals are crazy, like crazy. I went to visit a friend in one time, and it was insane, like the amount of things that were going on in there. There was not enough staff for everything that was happening. Someone had punched someone in the face and they were bleeding. Like, it was just insane. And so, as you can imagine, no one wanted to go there. And so I remember being 17 years old, sat across in this room with my doctor, and he was looking at me and he was thinking, Heather, where are we going to put you next? And one of my biggest problems that I struggled with for so long, for the whole 4 years that I was in hospital, was that I didn't like taking my medication. I just hated taking it because sometimes there was extreme side effects. I didn't know what was me and what wasn't me. Sometimes it made your head cloudy. But the real reason I didn't like taking the medication was because I didn't feel like I deserved to get better. My mind was so clouded and distorted, and I felt like I deserved to suffer. So every time I went on medication and I would start to do well, I would then self-sabotage myself, take myself off the medication, and go back into a state of suffering. And the whole 4 years that I was in hospital, I probably went on like 10 different medications because I kept doing the same thing. I would go on a medication, it would start to work, and then again I would take myself off it. And now I'm 25 years old and I look back at my old self and I think to myself, Heather, what were you doing? I could have saved myself so much suffering. I could have saved myself so much time. But it was this strange dilemma where, as much as I hated suffering, I hated being a teenager that wasn't able to do normal teenage things. I hated missing out on everything that my friends were doing. I hated that I felt so different to everybody. I hated being depressed and anxious, but at the same time, there was something so oddly comforting about that place because it was all I knew. For so long, that was how I lived, and so in a very strange way, I craved to stay like that. And I look back now in hindsight and I can see throughout those 4 years that at that time, I wasn't ready to get better. Until I had this moment when I'm in the room with my doctor, I'm 17 years old and he sat across from me. Once again, I had took myself off my medication, so I was in a bad state. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping properly, I was just a mess. And he looked at me and he said, right now, you're definitely not fit enough to go into the community. So are we going to have to think about an adult psychiatric hospital? And in this moment, I was just like hit across the face with the reality of the path that I could go down. And honestly, I knew in my soul that if I was to be sent to an adult psychiatric hospital, there was only 2 options for me. Number 1 is that I would die. I would never get better, and so I would probably end my life. Number 2 is that I would just become another number in the system, and I would get stuck in that lifestyle forever and never be able to live a normal life again. And so in this moment, I'm looking at my doctor, and I'm envisioning my future, and all I can see is suffering and pain. I also started thinking about the past few years since my admission, and I started thinking about all the pain and the suffering that I was constantly going through. And I just really had a moment of like, is this what I want for my life? When is this going to end, Heather? When is something going to change? They say that change first occurs when the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of making a change. And for me, that's exactly what was happening in this moment, because I just saw a life of suffering ahead of me, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so I looked at my doctor and I said to him, please put me on medication, and this is the last time that I will ever take myself off it. And that was the last time. I didn't take myself off my medication again, thank God. Finally, and around 6 months later, I got discharged into like this community supported house where basically it's kind of like a middle house from when you've been in somewhere for so long, like you get really institutionalized. It's kind of like prison. You've been wrapped up in this little bubble, and so they kind of have to ease you back out into the community because it can be super overwhelming. You've not been part of the real society for so long, and so you need like extra support to just like build your life back up. And so from there, I built my life back up. I moved into my first apartment when I was 21. I went back to study. I got a job. It definitely wasn't a smooth sailing and just onwards and upwards. Like, it was still very difficult. There was many, many challenges to face. But overall, because of this decision, I was able to build my life back up and live happily ever after. No, but the reason I share this story is because this story is one of the most valuable lessons that I could have ever learned on self-responsibility. And the first lesson of self-responsibility that I learned is that we are the only ones who can save ourselves and nobody else can. Because the truth was, those 4 years that I was in hospital, I wanted someone else to make it go away. I wanted someone else to make it better. And looking back now, I can see how I ended up staying there for so long because of the choices that I made. Now, of course, I don't look back and blame myself or have any regrets. I was just a kid and I was just suffering, and in fact I needed to go on that journey in order to get the lesson that I got. But really, deep down, the true reason that I didn't change beforehand is because I truly believed that someone else could take it away. And it wasn't until years later when I was in the room with that doctor and I thought to myself, if I don't do something different, if I don't make a different choice, a lot worse is to come. And so if I could give you a task to do, it would be right now, just sit and reflect and think about if you are to continue on the path you are on in 5 years' time, where would you be? And like really sit and think about this. This is your life at the end of the day. It's not just any old thing. This is your whole life. Where would you be in 5 years' time if you were to continue how you are? And this can be with your diet, this can be with your friendships, your relationships, maybe the job you're in, maybe the environment you're currently living in. Where are you going to be if you continue doing the same things? And if the thought of where you might end up scares you, or fills you with dread, or fills you with fear, or you have some resistance, it's probably a sign that something needs to change. The second lesson I learned for self-responsibility is that we will keep repeating the same toxic cycles until we learn the lesson. I kept taking myself off my medication, and what would happen? I'd struggle until I hit a breaking point of suffering where I couldn't cope anymore. Then I'd go back on medication, things would start to get better, and then I'd do it again. I'd take myself off my medication, go back into a state of suffering, and I'd struggle, and I just repeated that cycle for 4 years. I kept repeating the same toxic cycle until I finally learnt the lesson in that room that day with my doctor. If you keep on repeating the same actions, you will get the exact same results. I saw something once that always stuck in my head, and it was about toxic relationships or friendships. And it basically said, you will keep attracting the same type of person just with a different name and a different face until you learn the lesson. And honestly, that blew my mind. Now, I've had my fair share of toxic friendships growing up, and honestly, I don't think I truly knew what a friend was until I was around 20 years old. And because my self-worth was so low growing up, I kept attracting the same type of people. People who would take advantage of me. People who would constantly put me down and didn't value me. Everywhere I went, I kept attracting the same type of people, just with a different face or a different name, until I finally learnt the lesson, which is that it's only me who's going to stand up for me. It's only me who can say, no, don't speak to me like that. It's only me who can be like, I'm going to walk away from this friendship. I'm not going to put up with this behavior anymore. It wasn't until I saw my worth that I was able to break free from these toxic friendships, and I was finally able to break the cycle. And so really, with every painful experiences in life, we have two paths. The path of staying the same, or the path of learning the lesson and doing something different. That's literally the two paths. And it sounds quite simple when you put it like this. But a big reason a lot of us don't often choose the right path is because the right path is the hardest path. Because of course, if it was the easy path, then we would all do it. But it's not, it's hard. It's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and visibly see that you're literally killing yourself. And being like, you know what? I'm going to change my lifestyle. I'm going to change my whole diet. I'm going to change everything about me. I don't want this for my life anymore. It's hard when you've studied for years and years for a career you've always wanted, but maybe it isn't what you expected and isn't making you happy. Everyone would think you're crazy to leave. You're making amazing money and it's such a respected role in our society, but deep inside you're unfulfilled, and so it would be so hard to give it all up, but you know that's what you need to do. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we are making a choice. Every day we have the power to be like, I'm not going to do this anymore. No one is coming to save me, so I have to save myself. I have to be the one to finally end this cycle of unhappiness. Because if I don't make a different decision today or sometime soon, where am I going to be in 5 years' time? If I could sum up self-responsibility in one sentence, it would be, what can I do about this? Self-responsibility is going from a mindset of I'm stuck, I have no choice, I'm powerless, to going to a mindset of what can I do about this? How can I take back my power and how can I make a different decision? It's realizing that there is usually always something we can do about our situation. That doesn't make it easy, that doesn't make it the good option, but there's something we can still do. And even when unfortunate circumstances do happen which are out of our control, there's something we can still do about it. We can always do something to make it better. If someone asked me today, Heather, honestly, would you go back all those years, all the suffering you faced, all those years in hospital, and would you trade it to live a normal life? To have been a teenager and done the normal teenage things, gone to uni and probably be on a very different path to I am now. Would you do that? Without hesitation, 100 times, I would say no. I wouldn't swap it for the world, because the lesson I have learned is so valuable. And I look at people today, everywhere I go, people so much older than me, people my age, and I see how unhappy they are in these toxic relationships, in these unfulfilling jobs. I see how they bury themselves so deep into their phones and TikTok so that they don't ever have to look up and actually see the reality of their life. I see how they eat themselves to death. They don't care about their health or their body, and they go down a path of diseases. And honestly, I think to myself, what a tragedy it is. Because I know how different their lives could be. I know how so much of it could be so prevented. It could all be so different if they just realized that they could make a different choice. I'm not going to eat like this anymore. I'm not going to be in this toxic relationship anymore. I'm not going to work this job I hate anymore. At the end of the day, everyone is on their own journey and their own timeline, and so I'm not here to judge. I hope you can see that I'm not saying this from a point of view of looking down at others, but actually from a place of deep sadness. I look back at my old self and I see where I went so wrong. I wish I could just shake these people awake and be like, come on, man. You can be so much better. Your life could be so different. Don't keep going in this direction. Don't keep making the same choices. Don't you know that the type of life you could live, where life is so beautiful, life is so vibrant, so full of energy and happiness, is literally at your fingertips with just making different choices. We all have so much power within us to make a change, and we just don't even realize it. And I hope this video can at least make just one person go away and think about their life in a different way. But yeah, thank you for watching the video. I hope it's left you with something to think about, and I really hope the best for you going forward. Thank you so much.